Okay, good evening and welcome to the meeting of the North Ogden City Council. Thank you for being here. We have our special reminder first, I should say. Please turn your phones on silent or turn them off for the meeting. I'd like to excuse council members Satterthwaite and Uri, who asked to be excused from tonight's meeting. And we'll begin with a invocation and pledge of allegiance, and we're lucky it was assigned to one of our council members who is here, Councilman Turner, so we turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Our Father in heaven, we're very grateful for this opportunity we have to come together as council members and residents of North Ogden City, and we're grateful for this meeting and for the opportunity we have to help this community move forward. We pray that Thy Spirit will be here with us so we make decisions that will help this community. We're grateful for the service of the employees and those that help take care of this city. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise and repeat pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Turner. We have up first on our consent agenda 3 sets of minutes to be considered: October 24th, November 14th, and November 21st. Are there any comments or corrections on these minutes or a motion?
Mayor, I'd move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Then the consent agenda passes on 3-0 vote, and we'll move to first item on our active agenda, which is public comments. If there's anything anyone would like to share with the City Council, we invite you forward at this time. Okay, seeing none, we'll have another time for that at the end of the meeting. Let's talk about deer here first. So we've been discussing deer, of course, several meetings, council members. We had a discussion in the most recent meeting that we were going to do some work to find out how we could do a count of the deer, what an estimated cost would be for that, and bring that plan back to you. We've had Jordan from our city who's been working on this, Jordan Wayment, and our city administrator and attorney, John Call. So, John, let's turn the time over to you to bring us up to speed on what you and Jordan have to propose.
So, Council, I'm going to focus on the money side, and then Jordan will stand up and talk to you about kind of the counting plan. Essentially what we found is, based on some recommendations from the DNR, that they've had some success in using volunteers, and so there's not going to be a lot of outlay of money, but we do think that we would like the option to buy maybe 4 trail cameras to put them in some of the problem areas. The nice thing about that is our Parks Department would find new purposes for those cameras after the deer were counted, to put them maybe in random spots around and see if they catch things going on that shouldn't be going on. So what we're asking for is about $600 to buy cameras, trail cams, and then about $400 to provide some refreshments to the folks that'll be counting. So that would be about $1,000, and that's a fairly rough estimate. We're not sure how much the donuts and the hot cocoa will cost us until we know how many volunteers we get. But
What kind of donuts are they?
The good ones.
The good ones?
The good ones, yeah. But that's kind of the money side of the plan. Any questions about that before Jordan comes up to tell you kind of how we're going to mobilize the folks to help with the counting?
I have a Critic camera you can have. I don't use it.
Okay. And we also might
Use an SD card. So
yeah, and that also might be something that happens is there might be enough cameras in town that we could borrow from folks because they're not using them in the middle of the winter, that we might be able to, we'll kind of use all the resources available to us to save what we can. So.
Okay, with that then, let's invite Jordan Wayment up. He's a student at Utah State University, some kind of biology. I'm not sure exactly what. He can probably fill us in, and has been working on a proposal of how we could do a deer count. So Jordan, welcome.
Yes, thank you. So when I first started to collect some data on how other cities have done this, there's been 3 methods. One method is they would hire, a professional hunting crew, and what they did to count their deer and their patterns is they'd use the trail cams. They placed them in problem areas of where they were going to expedite the deer. And then also, one of the ladies that emailed John forwarded to me, she talked about the volunteer, and it's basically a live observatory, and it's pretty cool. And I thought this was the best one, just because it's going to be the most effective, I think, for cost, and I think it's going to be fun for the community to be involved. Oh, thank you. You brought the map up. So basically, how they would do it is they would set a date, and they will have volunteers meet at a rally point. Let's say somewhere along on the far east side of North Ogden, by the gravel pit or whatnot. We'd all have a rally point there, and we'd have set routes throughout the whole city. And the key point is...
It works on that one. I don't think it'll work on TV.
Okay, yeah. So we'd have some sort of a rally point here by the gravel pit, or somewhere where a lot of us can gather together. Now the key point is, so this is just a rough draft that has been drawn up of a route that would go through and count the deer, and we know there's some confounding factors of like visibility and things like that, but we'd work those out. And so with the rally point, then the key point is we'd have to everyone start at the exact same time and go throughout their route. So then we'd all meet, and then we'd all kind of work our way through and count all the deer, within their route. So that way, inside of their route, they would count their deer inside their boundaries so that they're not getting overlapped by other routes. And then so this way we can set a date, everyone meet together, we have refreshments, we go out and we do our count, and then we come back and kind of collect all of our data and kind of get a general idea of how many deer are in the area. So the cool thing about this is this live observatory is that we can do this multiple times throughout the season. So we can do one in the wintertime, we can do one in the springtime, one in the summertime, and in the fall time. We can do one because it's low cost, and I think it's going to be fun because there's 4 stakes in North Ogden is for the LDS Church, and I think a lot of the LDS churches have scoutings, and they have a lot of people that like to volunteer for things, and I think that's going to be easy to spread the word on hey, this is what we're doing, we'd like to have volunteers or whatever, or have scout groups come and work together. And so I think utilizing volunteers through the LDS Church that way, and also once we have a date set, we can use other social media and other ways to create announcements for the Deer Observatory. So and then also we just want to make sure we get the map dialed down and routes put together, and then assign dates, and then get counting for these deer.
And one of the things that Jordan was mentioning to me is that as they're counting, we're going to have them actually mark on a map where they're seeing them, so that then part of his program, he'll actually create a new GIS map that'll show this is where they're congregating. This, so it'll help us even identify the problem areas, not just based on complaints, but based on where they're actually being seen.
Is this a daytime count, nighttime count, or both?
As many as we can do it. That's the beauty of it. We can do it. I think it's going to be easier at night because deer typically their patterns as they move around more at night, right before sunset, and that's kind of what other cities have done as well, and that's what they recommended. And so at night, but we can also do during the day too, or in the morning.
Would it be spotlighting? Is that how we would be counting?
We'd probably mostly do it before the sun went all the way down, so it's still enough light to see.
And also, it's probably important to set some expectations. This is not going to be, or we shouldn't present it as a count of deer in the city or anything even approximating a total count of deer, because we're not even going to all areas. There's tons of factors we wouldn't be able to control for. It would need to be a relative count. We compared the same areas in the winter and the summer to try and get a general idea maybe of how many more are here in the winter time, instead of anything trying to be an actual count of deer. So we're hoping it would provide some relative information of deer in the summer versus deer in the winter.
Jordan, you probably haven't figured out how many volunteers you're going to need until you get the map and everything, right?
Correct, yeah.
You have even a ballpark figure? Are you thinking 100 or are you thinking 20?
So the cool thing is we can do it with, 12, anywhere from 6 people, because if we have a nice route and we could have one person do that route and we have 6 routes, we can have one person do that. They just have to do it at the same time. However, I think it's a good idea because through the LDS Church, they have what's called fast packs, and they each ward has their own route. And it would be nice to have, if we can get that data and put it all into one large map of North Ogden of all the different routes, and then have each ward, if we could, we're talking lots of people, to go through those routes, because they're in those routes. Those boys, they go do them. They do them every month, and so they know the route, and so then we can just have them count the deer within that route that they have already set, which would be cool. So yeah, anywhere from 6 people to 100 people.
Our preference would be to have more than one person per team so that someone can focus on driving and the other people can count. So that would be the hope.
Yeah.
And they have to count above like 10.
Yeah.
Well, some of us wouldn't be able to go.
Yeah.
I'll be the driver.
Yeah. And so yeah, and like I'd want to figure out a way to, cuz I was actually talking to a lady on the on the bus, and she lives right on the North Ogden border, and she says, down there, she's like, oh, I know right where all the deer are over there, but it's not in North Ogden City too. And so I don't know if we wanted to expand, to do Ogden, Pleasant View, and Harrisville type areas too, but
not right now.
Okay.
So this is discussion and or action. So we had talked about having $3,000. You're asking, if I remember reading the memo right, John, you were asking to allocate $1,000 for this, and then if we need more in the future, you'd come back and we'd do a budget modification or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So we're anticipating that after doing the first count during the winter months, then we'll know if we're going to exceed that $1,000. And the other thing might happen is it might spill over into next year, where we might do the next count in July as opposed to June, but it'll just depend on what kind of works for everyone's schedules.
So and then as far as the cameras go, we're buying this we're paying this out of the general budget. Is that what we're paying out of it? So and then as the cameras go, if we use them elsewhere, would they? And if we wanted more cameras, other departments could pay for them if they work out really good for what we'd want, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, and so like we would use the cameras for the areas that like are problem areas where we can't really, unless we get permission to walk down and see, like because of the hills and valleys and stuff like that. And so we'd put the cameras in those types of areas.
Cool. Make a motion, Phil. Make a motion, man.
All right, I'll make a motion then, Carl. Yes, sir. Mayor, I'd move then that we approve the recommended $1,000 to start a preliminary relative deer count, as discussed.
Second.
Third it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this plan for a deer count. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes on a 3-0 vote, and we'll move on to item 3.
Mayor, if I may, real quick,
Thanks,
Jordan,
buddy.
I would encourage you to contact John Stennett and Thane Schaefer and some of our other drone users who have high-resolution drones that could help in some of the areas where we can't get somebody out on foot in the middle of a field or something like that.
We even had a suggestion. We're seeing if we can get them to do it for free, but having one of the thermal imaging helicopters come over.
Oh, wow.
Especially in the wintertime, because that would actually give us a better count,
We'd get a great count, yeah.
especially with how cold it is
Yeah.
right
That's
now.
cool.
So.
And we'll work on that as well. So Thank you, Jordan. Thanks, John.
Be cool.
We'll go to item 3, which is to consider a final inspection on Cactus Ridge Subdivision Phase 2, and welcome our awesome Public Works Inspector, Justin Schinzel here. Justin, why don't you tell us about your inspection on this subdivision?
Okay. This is Cactus Ridge Phase 2. It's the Nanny Group that developed this section up off of 575 and 3725. Yeah, the green one. I'm sorry. And this one has turned out fine. There was a few hiccups at first. But we had some issues with some water meters and water boxes and so on and so forth, but we got those all fixed. Had a small problem with a settling issue for their sewer trench, and we got that repaired. And so I've been doing my due diligence to make sure that this will function properly and not be a major headache for the city.
Okay, any questions, council members, on this subdivision? So this would be for final approval.
This is for the green one, and the next
Yes.
one will be the purple one?
Yeah.
Is that what we're?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
I move that we approve the final inspection for Cactus Ridge Subdivision Phase 2.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to grant final approval to Cactus Ridge Subdivision Phase 2. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that subdivision is approved on a 3-0 vote, and we'll move to item 4, Cactus Ridge Subdivision Phase 2,
This is
Phase 3.
Phase
or 3, excuse me.
This is also a Nanny development. Was done by a totally different contractor, and they did a really good job. They had a couple issues that we had to get taken care of, as far as an irrigation line broke, filled some catch basins, and then 3 days later, before they could get it all cleaned out, another storm hit and flooded out down the road. But we got those all cleaned out. They spent about 4 days with a sewer cleaner truck that they hired a private company to come in, clean them all out. We've gone through and we made sure everything's cleaned, grouted, curb, gutter, sidewalk, asphalt looks great. The collars are all good. And this one actually is probably the last one that we installed our old standard pressure regulator valve. So from here on out, we'll have the new pressure regulator valves in the system.
Okay, so this will go into a conditional inspection for a 1-year period. Money will be held in escrow to guarantee against any problems. So any questions on this one, council members?
Mayor, I'd move that we accept the conditional inspection for Cactus Ridge Phase 3 as discussed.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to grant conditional acceptance to Cactus Ridge Subdivision Phase 3. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
and Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that passes as well on a 3-0 vote. And we'll go to another subdivision. This is a big one. Cove subdivision at the top of the city is coming for final inspection. So Justin, let's take some time, talk us through this one, what inspections have been done. This is a very large subdivision, so kind of bring us up to speed on this one.
Okay, this one is kind of a joint effort between me and previous Public Works Inspector Bruce Higley, and previous all the way around, city manager, everything. When it first was retaken over by Randy Marriott, it was written up that all the infrastructure was accepted at that time in the subdividers agreement, but they were still missing an easement with Regency. Yeah, right there in that corner. They had some quote-unquote park islands, so as they have the subdivisions, or they have the lots, they're in 4 lots. They have a little driveway that goes in to those 4 lots. We had a detail on the islands. After much discussion with John and Marriott, they were able to get those seeded with natural vegetation. They made sure they were all clean and ready to go. So everything from the understanding that everything was accepted infrastructure-wise. There was a few minor paperwork and other issues, but there was never a final granted to the mayor and council for this subdivision. That's why I'm here tonight, is to say that we have gone through it all. We've gone through all the breakdowns and went through everything that we could think of to make sure that we were insured and covered.
How about the little private lanes there? Has that gotten resolved, that they're private and not public?
The lanes around
The homes?
yes, they are private.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The little lanes that the
Yes.
homes are actually on.
Yes.
Okay.
Those
Good.
are where the islands fall,
Right.
and they will be maintained by the HOA.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Council members, any questions on the Cove subdivision? This one's been a long time in the works since.
Yes, very much. I'll move that we accept the final inspection on the Cove subdivision.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to grant final approval for Cove subdivision. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that is approved as well on a 3-0 vote. And we thank you, Justin, and great work from Justin and Dave in our Public Works Department on these inspections. And we'll move on now to the document that actually governs our Public Works inspections, our Public Works standards. It's typical that we regularly update our standards, and we actually have this evening, council members, our new city engineer, Lauren Gardner. So I'd like to welcome Lauren up and maybe introduce yourself first a little bit to the council. I'm not sure if I don't think we've had you in here before.
not yet.
So welcome, we're glad to have him. He's housed over at the Public Works Department, and of course is split between us and Pleasant View City, so that we were able to get a full-time engineer together, and we're quite happy to have him. So welcome, Lauren.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in public service almost my whole career. Many years I worked for Ogden City. I've worked for a consultant that did city engineering, and that's where my career has been focused, in the public realm doing city engineering. So a lot of the standards that we look toward, like the APWA standards, I've been on some of their specifications, technical spec committees, and have helped establish some of those. So I'm fairly familiar with standards and how they're put together, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. So, as Justin was telling you, he's been inspecting these subdivisions, and sometimes there's problems that go on with settlement, with issues in quality of the materials and stuff like that. And our standards are here to help us to provide the best quality of a product out there, give us a long lifetime on that asset, because those are assets that the city is taking over, whether it's a sanitary sewer, a roadway, storm drain facilities, water lines. Those are assets, and we want to always try to improve the quality of our standards so that we have good assets that will have a duration of their lifetime, whether it's 20 years, whether it's 40 years. Some sewer lines have been in the ground for 100 years and are still functioning. So if a standard is set up where that sewer line, for instance, good quality material, the construction, the bedding, the backfill, all have been done properly, those things can last quite a while. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the changes that have happened to our specifications and standard drawings since our last adopted set. The earlier version was adopted in 2011. So we're here now in 2017. We try to, every 5 to 7 years, look at revising ours. And that's where we're at today. So Matt from Jones & Associates, he has done the majority of all the revisions. I sat down and looked at all the changes that he proposed, and then sat down with each one of the supervisors in the Public Works section to discuss their areas of expertise and go over some of the changes. And what we have presented here, and I think you've all seen a copy of it, decided and reviewed and recommend for approval tonight. So here's a couple of the changes that were proposed by Jones. They, on our streets, they have included the decorative lighting, which is CS22. And some of the changes on the decorative lighting that they have, these are actually on the drawings.
Which is the back, right?
So it's all the way down at the bottom. But CS22 is going to provide for a little better access for the wiring, for better maintenance. But they are adopting or proposing those decorative lighting, and that's the ones that we've been putting up on Washington. Another change, and Justin mentioned this a little bit, in our water system, we have adopted a new PRV vault, total self-contained. It's going to give us a long lifetime. The old vaults were just concrete vaults, and we put different valving and piping in there to make up the PRV system. Well, the new ones, and they are designed by Engineering Fluid, Inc., and this is going to be on CS11. And we have been installing several of those throughout the city already. Dave, I think it's 4?
Yeah, we've done 4.
4 of them have been installed so far throughout the city. Okay. Couple changes to our storm drain system. If we look at CS18, it gives us a little more detail to our detention basins, some of the requirements for those. One thing that is included now, they are proposing some setbacks from the property lines that didn't exist beforehand. and adding some additional requirements for landscaping within those detention ponds. Another item on CS 19 is one regarding low impact development. These are standards that, and as Matt has mentioned, I think he's mentioned this before, they should be part of the city code, but currently we're putting them in these standards at least so we have a place to have those available and approved, but maybe look at in the future adopting them as part of the city code. One of the exciting things, this is on CS 25, the last page of the standards. Matt has put together a map, and these are of our sensitive areas within the city. Some of these, as you can see, the yellow circles with the red in the middle, those are where wells are, and those are sort of the wellhead protection zones where we do not allow anything such as infiltration basins or retention ponds within those areas. And also, if there are facilities that need to have oil water separators so they don't impact our system. On this map also, it delineates in the light blue where we have soils that are what we call hot soils or very reactive with our ductile iron water pipes, cause a lot of corrosion. We either have to wrap the ductile iron in a special material to keep that electric circuit from working and corroding the pipe. So we've designated that as a hot soil area where we want only PVC water lines to go in that area now to avoid some of those corrosion problems, and we can extend the life of our water mains. On this map also are some other things related to where our hillside protection zones are. We can protect our springs and our wells and things like that. So it's a real nice addition to our standards. After I started reviewing the standards that Matt had proposed, I recommended a few other changes to these standards. And these are mainly to help maybe extend the life of our infrastructure out there and increase some of our safety. A couple of those, I've noticed a lot, there's a lot of concrete work, curb gutter, driveways going in that we get settling and cracking happening on those. So I've proposed, and it's in the plans tonight, that we increase the amount of base material beneath those curb gutter and driveway approaches from 4 inches to 8 inches across those. It will give it a better structural section, and it will be able to take the loads during construction and hopefully reduce some of that settlement. Also, a couple things that I've learned over the years, especially in these hilly areas where we come to an intersection, and we have steep grades coming into the intersection, and then they terminate right at the street. Try stopping on that when we get ice and snow on there. It becomes really difficult. So I proposed in here what we call a landing. It's an area that softens that curve or softens the slope down to sort of ease into that intersection rather than come down at a steep angle. So there's standards set aside based on what type of road it is and how long that landing. And the landing is considered, once you get over a 3% grade, then you have a certain distance. You have to keep that 3% coming into that intersection or going out of it to make it a little more easier to drive and manage stopping and those type of things. So, I've also put in here some minimum and maximum slopes for our roadways. If we have a really flat slope, it's hard to drain it. So we like 1%, but 0.5% I've set as a minimum standard, and a maximum I would like, and it's written in the standards, 10% maximum slope for major roads and 15 on local minor roads. Now, there may be sections where it's necessary to go to a steeper slope for a short duration, but that will be as we review the project on a specific basis. The last thing, we've also looked at some different pipe materials for some of our utilities, and in this version, we've added a possible use of HDPE. That's a high-density polyethylene that can be used on water lines, sewer lines, and those type of things. But right now, a pressure pipe specification is shown in here. So those are basically some of the major changes that are occurring on our standards today. We are looking forward to considering the future adoption of our APWA specifications and incorporating them into these plans. Right now, there's just a few of the standards that are referenced on here, but looking at maybe globally in the future, adding these to these specifications. So.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Great report, and I hope you can see why we're thrilled to have Lauren on board. A lot of years of experience, including in California, correct?
Yes.
So even the more stringent requirements and things that are there for cities, so great experience, and we're happy to have Lauren here. So any questions, council members, on the proposed revision to the city public works standards?
Could we go over all 144 pages?
We sure could.
Word by word? Okay. No.
Councilman Turner.
Just a couple quick questions on this document is a living document, correct? I mean, it's something that we can, as technology comes up and
Definitely.
stuff. I mean, I want to make sure when we approve this that it's understood by developers, whoever, that if they come up with a new product tomorrow, that it, as long as it's approved by, that. And by the way, that if you use that HD pipe,
HDPE, yes.
I've used it. It's pretty awesome.
Oh,
in fact, it's we used it for fire lines. You don't have to do thrust blocks.
And you can weld that in the field.
It's pretty awesome.
It's fantastic stuff.
So. And the life expectancy on that is like 100 years. So it's pretty awesome. And then I haven't read through all of them. I'm sorry, I do read this stuff. And I haven't had a chance to get through all of it yet, but the ADA stuff, is it in here, or is it going to be in the other standard you're talking about?
We do have ADA requirements.
Is it addressed in here? Okay, yeah. Like I said, I haven't got to that point yet. Yeah. So I just know that there's the American Disabilities Act. There's actually I don't know, a movement, I guess we could call in the industry, that people are now becoming ADA inspectors, and it's really big in California right now. And so we just they'll go out and inspect, and if they find things out of compliance, there can be fines that are levied. So we just need to make sure, and it's starting to step up a little bit. So
and every year there's new changes to the ADA and certain issues that they have concern about, and we try to incorporate those into our standards as they come about. So,
okay. From what I've read, I like the what I've read so far and stuff. And the only suggestion I would make is maybe instead of having it be public works standards, maybe public works minimum standards, just because then if someone does come along and they have a better system, it is not that difficult. But anyway, I'm fine with the way it's written so far.
One thing about our subdivisions, like all the subdivisions that Justin was working on, those fall under the year that they were approved. So we have current subdivisions that are ongoing right now that once this is adopted, they won't be doing these standards, but will be incorporating the ones that they were adopted under. So from here on out, any new subdivisions that come in will have to follow these.
So what he means is in Utah, it's an early vesting statute, one of the earliest in America, which is as soon as they file an application, they're vested in all the rules that the city has on the day they file the application. So those who file an application for subdivision 6 months ago but haven't finished the process of getting all the approvals are still going to be subject to the old
They
standards.
still get to use the old standards.
Yeah. But anyone from, assuming this is passed, anyone from tomorrow forward, when they bring in that application, now has to meet the new standards.
Okay, other questions or discussion on the revised public works standards?
Ordinance number?
2017-28.
And just to be clear, council, this does actually amend a section of our code, just so that, you know, it's very clear that this 10-6-1 is amended to reference this document that Lauren has just talked about, but it is an actual code amendment, so.
Should we mention that in our motion?
Yeah.
Okay. Here I'd move then that we approve ordinance 2017-28 amending
And-
section,
10-6-1.
yeah, I wrote that down, 10-6-1, public works standards and drawings.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this resolution amending the public works standards and associated city code. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
and Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then those are passed on 3-0 vote, and we appreciate all the hard work of Lauren, Dave, our contract city engineer, Jones as well. They're not here, but have put a lot of work into this, as well as Justin, who was here earlier. This will be a great step for our city, and as new things come up, there'll be some more revisions to these for sure in the future. Okay, up next, council members, we have 2 public hearings and or discussion or even action, if you felt so inclined, on 2 proposed modifications to our zoning code. These are the first time they're coming before the city council tonight, so there is a public hearing, which is part of changing any land use requirement in the city. And then council, we can have as much discussion on this, and then, like I say, you could table these to review it more, or decide if you felt so inclined, or however you would like to proceed. So the first of the 2 is discussion about our sign permit process. This has come up at the request of some of our new businesses, and Rob, our city planner, has been leading an effort to make some updates that we think will make this a more user-friendly process for getting new signs for businesses. So Rob, we'll ask you to kind of explain to council what this proposal is. We'll then hold the public hearing to see if there's any comments, and then it will come back to you, council, for consideration or whatever you'd like to do with the ordinance.
Thanks, Mayor, members of the council and audience. As the mayor gave a good introduction on this, and that is, as we look at our ordinances, we try to make sure that they are effective in making sure that the public's health and safety and welfare are all addressed, as well as the opportunity to have effective processes for the way that we institute and administer these. We have in our sign ordinance provisions that require that conditional use permits be a part of certain types of sign types. And what it's ended up being is that these sign types require someone to submit a specific application beyond what's normally in the commercial sense for, and that's where the majority of them are. as part of a site plan review, they also have to submit a conditional use permit application. In addition to that, on residential projects and properties, we typically see those as part of either model homes or in the as far as residential is concerned. So it's a couple of minor things, but it ends up extending the process for our site plan review to a considerable amount. So as such, staff, as we've looked at this, we discussed this with the Planning Commission on a couple of occasions, identified for them what the parameters are for what is anticipated with this ordinance. So if we've got the ordinance up there, and then as I reference that, we'll be able to reference the ordinance as I go through the description. So first and foremost, one of the things that is important to recognize is that conditional use permits, as identified by the state and then included in your staff report under sub 2A, a conditional use shall be approved if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards. So as I point out in here, the Planning Commission has never found a detrimental effect in any of our sign reviews. And in fact, our sign ordinance, it's definitely not perfect, but it does have good standards as far as being able to identify location, size, landscape buffers, heights. All of those things are spelled out in the ordinance. There really isn't an opportunity to really look at detrimental effects because we already have an effective standard for them, is our understanding and our conclusion relative to this. So that's why this is coming before you. Let's streamline our process. Let's recognize that we still will have the ability to review these standards as part of applications as they come in. At the same time, let's see if we can't make our process a little better. So there's 4 sections of the ordinance that are proposed to be changed. The first one is we just pull up the ordinance there, John. So 1122.5 is a description of the comprehensive sign plan. So as part of commercial reviews, people have the opportunity to produce an overall sign plan, and you've seen a couple of them as part of like the Village at Prominence Point and what have you, their sign package for their project. So as part of this, the Planning Department, under this amendment, the comprehensive sign plan for proposed or existing development for multi-tenant shopping centers may be approved by the planning director or his designee. So basically it's eliminating the requirement for a conditional use permit. Still there's a review as part of these, as part of sign permits. And sign permits are all done by building permit. So you remember that when we discussed how the process for doing land use permits, how that building permits would constitute the land use permit review. I'm working on a report to come back to you all relative to that, but it's worked out extremely well in my opinion. So the next provision is 1122.7, and as a part of this section, it talks about sign permitted for non-residential uses in specific districts. So the electronic message display signs were only allowed by conditional use permit. And again, we have good standards as far as location, size, all of those things. Remember the one we did with the schools, and we actually created a standard for the amount of light and lumens and to that. So basically what this one does, it makes this as an administrative review as well. The third one has to do with residential, and it has to do with on-site subdivision advertising signs. So periodically someone will want a sign advertising their subdivision, and they'll generally place that on a corner saying subdivision X number of lots, etc. Here's the contact information. We've got good standards as far as size, location for those as well. What this does is it makes those signs approved by building permit as a permitted use. Last but not least, there's the model home advertising signs. So you have an overall sign for the overall subdivision. Sometimes we don't have a whole lot of model homes being built anymore, but every once in a while, we've had since I've been here, I'm thinking maybe 2. But those were required to go through a conditional use permit review. And as such, the model home advertising signs are approved. I've said land use permit. We could actually use building permit in here as well. And I'm not so enamored by the phrase process required for model homes. You really could reduce that some to through the building permit process, comma, the following parameters could be trying to, again, we don't need more words. If we don't need more words, let's don't have more words, so to speak. Then you'll see that the Planning Commission also discussed with this establishing a time limit for the operation of a model home. There was no standard for that. We have so few of them. We discussed putting in some kind of a standard. The Planning Commission just didn't feel it was necessary, and staff concurred just to eliminate that provision altogether. And then last but not least, under flags, a model home may use flags, so we don't require a conditional use for that. So that's the sum and substance of it. Planning Commission is recommending unanimously that this amendment be adopted. Happy to answer questions, Council.
Council members, any questions for Rob about the proposed sign review ordinance? Okay, thank you, Rob.
Hopefully it's pretty
we may have
straightforward.
some after. We'll hold then a public hearing on this proposed change. So, ladies and gentlemen, the public hearing is now open. If anyone has any comments on this proposal to change our review process for commercial signs, we welcome you at this time to come forward and state your comments. Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you then. The public hearing is now closed, and council members, this returns back to you for any discussion you'd like to have. If you'd like some time to review this, when you'd like to see it back, or any instructions on things you'd like the staff to research before it comes back, or if you feel this is ready for approval, you could do that as well. So how would you like to proceed?
I'm okay with it. You go, Phil.
I'm okay with it.
John, should I reference all 4 sections that are being amended?
In this one, you wouldn't need to. You
Okay.
could just, the other one, I just wanted to make it a little more clear. But here, Rob's done a good job in his motion or his presentation to identify those.
Okay. I'll make a motion then that we approve ordinance 2017-29, amending 4 sections in our code.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve these changes to our sign ordinance. Is there any further discussion? Start voting with Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
and Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that passes on a vote of 3-0. And I think will be a great step to simplify our permitting process for signs, reduce sending all of these to Planning Commission when there's really not ever been any changes coming out of it. So
Nicely done.
it will be nice for our businesses too, because they would like to be able to get their signs up, and we have a good ordinance that already sets the parameters. So, okay, up next, we have another item relative to our commercial zones as well. We had a request from one of our businesses, All the Flutter, who I think we have some representatives from them here tonight, to consider a change to our code which would allow residency in commercial zones. kind of a live-work type situation, which our ordinances have not contemplated or do not authorize currently. And so we went through a process again with Planning Commission and the city staff to review this. And Rob, can you give council members a overview on this proposed ordinance?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and again, City Council and members of the audience. We received communication from the owners, the Vandeveers from All Flutter, and as part of our discussion, they have a desire to, and they have sufficient land at their property to add a residence. They would like to sell their home and be able to, as the mayor indicated, do a live-work thing, live right there on the site as part of their business. So we discussed with the owners on a couple of occasions the potential parameters, how that might work. We ended up holding a discussion with the Planning Commission back in October, got some direction from them. We held a further discussion with them relative to the specifics of the ordinance, and then actually they asked us to hold a public hearing, which the Planning Commission conducted on the 15th of November. So there are 5 component parts to this ordinance. The Planning Commission is in favor of allowing for this type of activity to occur. And if I can just draw a parallel, and when we have been looking at our master plan community zone, obviously mixed use is a critical component of that philosophy and what have you. In our C1 and C2 zones, however, we do not allow any type of residential. I think there is boarding house or something like that, but that's it. So the idea was if we have larger projects, then we probably would gravitate to the discussion of a master plan community zone. But for a smaller project and what have you, these are the parameters that the Planning Commission feels comfortable with. So first of all, that the lots would not be any greater than 15,000 square feet. So again, if it's a larger parcel, then, and this would accommodate these folks' parcel. Secondly, that it would be subject to site plan review. Thirdly, that there would be some provisions for side and rear yard setbacks, and I'm going to go through the details of that particular one here in just a minute. Then that there would be a parking requirement, 2 stalls for the residents in addition to the commercial parking, and that no recreational vehicle parking would be allowed. So those are the parameters for allowing for these to be allowed in C1 and C2. So let me go through these as part of as identified in the staff report. First of all, there was a fairly detailed discussion about whether or not there should be a requirement that the residential unit be owner-occupied. The Planning Commission unanimously is recommending in favor of this ordinance. However, one of the Planning Commissioners, Commissioner Mason, felt fairly strongly that it should be owner-occupied. He did not prevail in that discussion, and he, in fact, voted for the ordinance. But his request was, when this comes before you, which it is tonight, to have you at least hear that request. Secondly, should there be additional setback standards? Now, in our commercial zones now, if a commercial property abuts a residential zone, there's a requirement for a 10-foot automatic setback, and that's not going to change with this at all. There was some discussion about, well, should there be some additional requirements for setbacks within commercial, given the fact that there's residential there? Planning Commission again felt like that if the building was going to be a detached building, then there should be a 10-foot setback from the side and from the rear yards and what have you. Front yard, of course, would always doesn't go away either. If it happened to be that the residential unit was attached or incorporated into the building, then the standard setbacks for commercial would then apply. So we had some discussion with our building official relative to, could you actually put a building on property line in that instance? Practically, the answer is yes, you can. You have to have fire ratings. You wouldn't be allowed to have windows on that side. Is that really a very practical thing? I guess that's the beauty of being able to make that kind of a decision. But in essence, that was how the Planning Commission kind of went back and forth on that. They concluded ultimately give flexibility to the property owner as to how they would like to address that. Any other thoughts on that? Did I adequately address that one, John?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So again, parking stalls, two for the residents in addition to the other stalls. Recreational vehicle parking, they determined they didn't want to see RVs and other things in the parking lot there, so they're recommending nothing there. They also discussed whether there should be other additional standards as far as landscaping or otherwise, and they felt like that the existing commercial standards would adequately address as they're incorporated into their design. So let me talk about just in terms of the general plan. Our general plan has some provisions in there that talk about maintaining the sustainability and community character of North Ogden. It also talks about that we should be proactively looking at ordinances to make improvements and so forth. That's the basis of the general plan, and the Planning Commission, as part of their findings, they found that this amendment is consistent with the general plan as part of their review. So as far as the standards for you, what standards should be applied? Is the amendment consistent with the general plan? Planning Commission recommended unanimously the amendment be adopted. Again, Commissioner Mason requested the council consider making an owner occupancy requirement. The owners, you can ask them how they feel about it. I didn't get a sense that they had a feeling one way or the other. They're going to be owner occupants, so I'm not sure. In the discussion with the Planning Commission, they obviously went back and forth as to whether or not providing additional comfort level for the city relative to having that circumstance on these smaller commercial lots or not. Anything to add on that, John? I think that pretty well covered it. So be happy to answer questions, council members.
Just a couple quick questions on how's the I mean, if it's a resident and they're living attached or however, how's the metering for like the water and power and all that? How's that all going to be addressed?
Well, I think that ties. David's here. He might be able to answer that better than I can, actually. But I'm assuming that if it's owner occupied, you probably could get by with 1 meter. If it's going to be not owner occupied, you may want to separate them. But
I think you're talking more the rate, right?
Yeah. I'm just how that's all going to work out and stuff. I'm just curious how that.
That's a very good question.
Or impact fees, probably the same thing. If that should be a residential impact fee and a commercial, or, I mean, I wouldn't see why not, honestly. But that is not something we've really discussed. But it does need to be resolved.
in this situation, there's an existing commercial building, so it would only be a residential that would be, and to address the mayor's question on the impact fee, correct, John?
And I would, as an advocate for people who pay impact fees occasionally, I would probably argue that they wouldn't pay a new water one, but they would pay for any additional impervious surface. But it largely depends on the type of use. For example, that building probably has 1 bathroom in it right now, which isn't enough to even they couldn't use enough water to cover what a house uses. And so by adding the house, you're not expanding that. But I think what we do is in those situations, we'd look at the amount of fixtures they're adding and compare those to a typical business or a typical single-family home and see if they're exceeding what we would see in either one of those circumstances. And if they were, then we would assess it. The flip side might be if it was a dry cleaners or a laundromat with an apartment, they'd probably pay 2 because the amount of water usage and stuff would be so high that we'd have a justification to actually do it. So we just do what's called an individualized analysis for each of these and decide at that time, do they pay for both, none, or how it's worked out that way, if that makes sense.
So that's really a separate discussion as part of building permit, as opposed to what this is doing, which is basically what are the zoning standards to allow this type of thing.
Well, yeah, and I'm not opposed to this plan. I just, the unintended consequences, and I'm just, because it's new to us and stuff, I'm just, because I know Ogden City does this. I know they have, there's quite a few places I know that they have restaurant below and there's apartments above and stuff, and so it's just, I'm just not sure how all those work. Never dealt with it, so, but again, I'm not opposed to the idea. I just want to make sure we thought through things, and some of it would be through permitting, because I'm assuming if there's going to be a resident, they're going to have an inspection on that, and so some of that stuff will be worked out that way anyway. So
the process would be, there would be a site plan review. It would go to the Planning Commission for the overall design, location, building style, colors, et cetera, that we always do in our commercial zones. And then once that was approved, then they would submit a building permit. And as part of that, then the things that John just talked about would be considered.
Well, if we decide we're going to do this, my wife wants to move in above Miss Kavanaugh's so she can go down and get chocolate all day.
I'm sure they would welcome her.
Councilman Swanson.
I have real concerns with this. Our mixed use, our MPC zone, is quite a different animal from allowing a residence to be built in a C1, C2, in my opinion. Smith's could section off 15,000 square feet, right? And build a residence. Under the ordinance, they could.
Well,
They would be allowed one single-family residence under the ordinance.
But they could do it. Anybody on a C1, C2 that owns a C1, C2 could, and that's, for me, that's part of the unintended consequences that we seem to be, to me, it's an over-expansion of the purpose of the MPC zone, where we take, and it seems, as I've thought about this since I first read through it late last week, it seems like we are creating an ordinance to address an individual issue, which is not good legislation, in my opinion. We don't legislate to individuals; we legislate for the city-wide.
Right.
And I don't believe that allowing a single-family residence to be built on a C1, C2 commercial designation is to the city's benefit. I think we segregate, and we've made a very large point of segregating commercial from residential so that we maintain a certain feel within the city. And I'm having real heartburn over this one. Give me some Tums.
well, it's a policy issue.
Right.
It's a determination as to whether or not you feel comfortable with it, obviously, first and foremost. Secondly, when we talk about our downtown area, we're talking about that mixed use is part of those set of goals that we have. So when we have these small parcels that are sitting out there, it's trying to make them be more viable. And the parallel to that in a lot of ordinances is that you would typically allow for example, a night watchman to be allowed on a commercial site. We don't do that. This might allow for something like that. But
Well, part of my concern, though, too, is, I mean, in this circumstance, it works great because we have the owners of the business also owning and occupying the home. Let's say the business goes belly up. We've had that happen in North Ogden. And all of a sudden, they decide to move, and the new owners of the property have used that property for some other use that's more intensive, less conducive to having a home next to it. And they don't want to live in that home. They have a home. And now we have a vacant home that can't be sold that turns into some of these other vacant homes that we've raised. I just see there's just so many. I'm trying to work through the negatives that could possibly be accompanied by this.
So in the event that something like that happened, especially if it was an attached dwelling to the business, then the expansion of the business could occur within that expansion.
Right, but what if it's a detached?
Potentially, you could expand it in even there.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me ask real quick, Rob. The
MPC.
not the MPC, the manufacturing zone we have where we have the storage sheds. I believe one of them has a person that stays there
Could very well
overnight. So is that allowed in the? I know I'm asking you a different zone off the top of your head, but I just thought it'd be an interesting kind of comparison.
Well, frankly, Mayor, we don't allow storage sheds in our ordinance.
Right. We just have some that were built previously. So
Anyway, but
I'm just,
I
sorry,
would
I'm kind of wondering
identify
that.
as part of that. It's a very typical thing to have as part of those kinds of operations, to have an on-site security presence. Not all of them have it, but
Most of them do. They have an
many of them
apartment or
do.
something.
Yeah, many of them.
I think the larger one we have in the city does have someone,
Yeah.
and I think the
Good
smaller
for
one
you.
doesn't. But
On-site
yeah.
manager.
So, granted, that's a little different zone, but that your night watchman comment made me think of that. The storage sheds that often have someone that lives there.
Another amendment on my list, Mayor.
Okay, any other questions for Rob before we have the public hearing? Okay, thank you, Rob. Ladies and gentlemen, the public hearing is now open. If anyone would like to speak on this proposed ordinance for allowing single residences as permitted uses within the commercial zones.
I think they're a little nervous.
Welcome. We'd love to hear from you.
Cheryl doesn't bite real hard.
It's like the friendliest one up there. My name is Linda Vandiver, and my husband and I own Olive Flutter. We are looking and hopefully are going to be able to build a little flat back there. We just want a patio home. We want something that we don't want anything humongous. We want it to be where we just plan on being there for as long as we can actually be there. And if we get to the point we can't be in, like Councilmember Swanson said, if the business were to fall, we would sell the flat along with the building as kind of a whole thing, so that whomever bought the business would have that responsibility. And it's going to be a new flat. So it's not going to be. I don't think anybody's going to want to come in and raise it, because it's going to be new. It's going to cost quite a bit of money to put it up. And we absolutely want it to be beautiful and to look nice. And we've worked really hard to get our building up and our business up and going, and have kind of struggled with it. It's been a struggle. We've really struggled a year and a half we've been there. And so we're kind of at the point where I think if we could build a little flat back there, and we live in a huge home in South Ogden that we just need to get rid of because I keep falling down the stairs. And we just want something small and something that's going to work for us. And I think a beautiful little flat next to our beautiful little old house it'll be good for North Ogden. We've met wonderful people. I love my little business, and I love the customers that have come in there. And so we're just hoping that North Ogden will understand where we're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vandiver. And the building really is beautiful, and I think the old white building, peeling paint it used to be, you guys have really done a nice job upgrading that building.
Steve Rasmussen, 1092 East, 3250 North. As I sat here and listened to the discussion, I had a thought pass through my mind as to why would we care whether these people have an RV or they don't? And why would the city want to legislate whether they can have one or whether they can't? I mean, I can see the concern of, attaching a residence to a business and then saying, okay, well, you've got to have parking, off the street parking, so that you can, but if that would accommodate it, I can't see us telling them or anyone else that might want to do this what kind of vehicles they can drive or what kind of vehicles they can own. If it were me, I'd be I'd be a little bit upset that I couldn't, if I wanted to have a trailer or something to go camping with, that I wouldn't be able to park that at my house, that I'd have to find someplace else to park it. So, that bothered me a little bit in the ordinance itself, and then I can't see where this would ever be a problem. As long as they're going to go with the building codes, they're going to build the structure the way the codes are going to be. Why shouldn't anybody that comes into the city and has a business, has enough property to be able to raise that structure? Why would that be a problem? Even if Phil Child wanted to build a residence on top of his hardware store there, why would we care? As long as it conforms to the height and all of the other standards that are, along with that kind of thing. So, I don't know that there should be a lot of restrictions, or this should just be something that I think would just be allowed through the city ordinances. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Okay, anyone else like to comment? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The public hearing is now closed, and council, this proposed ordinance comes back to you. Again, this is the first time it's come before you, so if you would like some time to study it, we could go that route. If you'd like more research or anything on specific areas, we can go that route, give us those instructions, or if you're comfortable with this, you could pass it as is or make some changes if so desired tonight. So how would you like to move forward?
I just have a comment.
Councilwoman Stoker.
When we're talking about mixed use and down the road a little ways, this is where it's going to be, and we're going to have commercial buildings, and you're going to put apartments or something above them that people will live in. So I honestly don't have a problem with this either. I think there can be, like you say, if it follows our commercial ordinances and it complies to code, I honestly don't see that it would be that big of a problem. I have no heartburn over it.
You take more Tums than I do.
Councilman Swanson.
Where are we going to have apartments over commercial?
There's not any in any
There
proposed
isn't.
projects yet.
At
but
Village
it-
of
yeah,
Prominence Points, there's nothing.
it
like
could
that.
It could
happen.
But it
on
could.
Washington Boulevard. I mean, it's opened. Just saying.
Although I'm not won't be voting on this ordinance at the end of the story. I don't have a vote, but I can see where Councilman Swanson's coming from. I also think it's a good idea in some situations, but I think it should be limited because I think some of the scenarios Councilman Swanson said could indeed occur and be a bad outcome in the future. I think we really should consider a owner-occupied requirement, so it's not like we got a business and a home rental as well. The owners are living in a home because it's a live-work situation, not a second business. So I'll just throw that idea out there. Rob?
The one proposal we have had with commercial, and that's the Cooperstown. Remember that discussion? They were going to put commercial and then put apartments above. That's the only one we've had specifically that is
The form-based code would contemplate that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
That's
the
the one
form-based code
that
would, for sure.
proposed south of Walker Theaters, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So other discussion on this, or does anyone have a direction they'd like to recommend going?
I think there should be some, like you suggested, Mayor, that it probably should be owner occupied. So that would at least alleviate that problem for future down the roads.
We would just keep it then to scenarios like what we have here, that somebody, the owner wants to live there, not a rental as
No.
well.
True.
It's an idea. The public hearing is closed, Mr. Rasmussen. Sorry. We'll have public comments at the end, though.
And as far as your comment on the RV, I mean, I can see where they said I wouldn't want an RV parked in front of a business. It kind of looks a little tacky. But I don't know if there's room behind it where they would live that would be out of sight. But I could see where they were coming from for no RV parked on the premises.
Yeah, we don't allow
We don't
it
even
parking
in-
at a business, so I
Yeah.
think that should stay absolutely,
Yeah.
because if a business goes out and somebody owns this and then they start using it as a parking lot for all their friends' boats, and
Yeah.
we've had that at the King's Plaza, and it looked awful when, there's all these just friends' vehicles now stored at the business. So we've put ordinances in that in a commercial zone, recreational personal vehicles are not parked in commercial zones. Councilman Swanson?
Two thoughts. One, the part of my heartburn is trying to get a handle on unintended consequences. I mean, because this does open every C2 and every C1 zone that we have, each parcel to a single-family residence, if somebody, the owner, wanted to put one on there. I think we'd limit that more and declutter the future by having an owner-occupied provision in there. I share some of Steve's Rasmussen's concern, though, about the RV piece. What we're essentially saying is, yes, you can have a single-family residence in a commercial zone, but you don't get to have all the rights that every other single-family residence has.
Correct.
So again, that just we're taking something in my mind that's clear. We have commercial and we have residential, except in a couple of storage unit things that are grandfathered from way before. And we're just muddying the water. Yes, you can have a residence, but you can't do all the things that a resident can do. You can't park your RV, if it's behind the side of the house or you have a pad, an RV pad. I can park one at my house, but so why can't they park one at their house? If we're going to grant a residence, then they ought to have all the rights that a residence has. And if we think that because it's in a commercial zone, there ought to be some residential rights that are withheld, then I don't think we allow residents in a commercial zone. I think it just gets too muddy, too many tentacles going out. Well, what about this? What about that? What about this case? For it to be easily managed, I'm more comfortable, I have to say, I am more comfortable with an owner-occupied provision. I don't know that I'm comfortable enough to vote for it, but it does make my heart burn less with that. But I am concerned that we would be telling somebody, you are essentially being granted a residential lot in a commercial zone, but you can't do all the things that any other resident can do.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Well, somehow you should be able to put that in there if they're going to be in a commercial zone, I think they would, in my thinking, you would think you would be commercial and not residential. You're just living above your workplace, period.
Or next to.
Well,
Yeah.
splitting hairs.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And that's part of my heartburn, is that we don't allow residential in commercial zone. We do in an MPC, and if we wanted to look at rezoning this particular commercial parcel as an MPC to allow that, I would have less heartache about that than I would about allowing residences in C1s and C2s.
I would agree with that.
I mean, I just don't see, other than an individual, and I love what you guys have done with it. Nothing personal. I love what you've done down there. Other than addressing an individual circumstance, I don't see where the city is benefited by allowing a residence in a C1, C2. And that's just where I am.
Okay, other discussion. Or does anyone want to throw out a motion on where to go from here with this, be it tabling it for some more thought and discussion, giving staff some additional items to research, or to pass this version or another version of this ordinance tonight? Councilman Turner.
So I'm not opposed to the ordinance, and I think that I understand Phil's concern, but I don't have the same concern. But I'm kind of leaning to the fact of tabling it, because I'd like to hear what the new city council people think about it too. I'd like to kind of weigh their opinions too, because I'm not against this, and I understand Phil's point too. So I just kind of like to hear some more input from them, maybe to see what their thoughts are on it also. And the RV parking, and Steve, I felt the same way, but then I kind of got thinking about it. Like Cheryl, if you can park it behind, so that to me isn't a make or break one. Originally, I felt exactly how you did, Steve, but then again, I also understand if Smiths wanted to put a house in their parking lot, I wouldn't like that idea either. So I'd just like to hear some of the other. That's kind of my way I'm leaning is. I haven't read this enough to. I haven't really thought about. I thought about how you do the water and on all that stuff. I never thought about the other consequences that these guys have brought up. So
along those lines, just for everyone's information, a new city ordinance requires 3 council members to vote for it. Even so, tonight we're unusual circumstance. We only have 3 members of 5. So a resolution, 2 members could pass, but a city ordinance even requires 3 affirmative votes from the city council. So just so you know, it would require all 3 of you to vote yes to pass it tonight. Just so everyone knows how the voting has to work.
So with that being said, I'd move we table this until we get the and be able to get the input from the new council members, and I'd like to hear what they have to say. That's what I would like to do then. So I make that motion.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to table this until next year, as this is our last meeting of this year. Councilman Swanson.
Oh, I was seconding.
Oh, okay, seconding. Okay. So we have a motion and a second to table this, and we'll bring this back in January when we have our new city council members seated, would be the intent. Is there any things any of you would like staff to research as part of this motion? Councilman Swanson?
I would like to, as perhaps an option to this, look at the ability to rezone that area from, is it C1 or C2 now, Rob?
I believe it's C1.
C1. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I would feel more comfortable, and again, just thinking off the top of my head, rezoning it as an MPC zone, where we are specifically wanting to have residential and commercial, and rather than going to the effort, I believe unnecessary effort, of allowing residentials in C1, C2.
MPC zone, we require a minimum of 5 acres, if I recall.
Is that what it is?
I think that's right. So that's the idea, is to try to be accommodating for these smaller lots and so forth.
Well, maybe, research if there's a way to do this without granting residents in a C1, C2, if there's some other zone that we create for this specific type of use.
What we have along Washington Boulevard now is the R4 zone, is the residential zone that's along.
Right. But that
as
doesn't
soon as
allow
you-
commercial.
Correct. So that's the idea behind this, is to
Right.
be able to have some mixed-use options there.
We don't need to go over that now.
Something to think about.
And yeah, for me, I would just be more comfortable if we had a specific zone for these intended uses rather than a blanket, okay, you can throw a house up now in C1, C2, so as long as it's owner occupied.
Okay, we'll research those items. Any others?
Sarah, study up on it.
One of our councilwomen-elect, Sarah Fossen, is here, so
Well, you have one council member that voted in favor of it already.
on
He's
the
a
planning commissioner. Okay. Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on this motion to table this item to January?
Do you know, like when, Mayor, so they will have an idea as to when? it's gonna
I think it will
resolved for
be the
them?
first or second Tuesday, and we'll confirm
Well, the
that
first will be the
shortly.
2nd of January.
Either the 2nd or the 9th. So, one of those first meetings, we'll get it on right away.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, then the motion again is to table this item. We'll start the voting with Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that item is tabled on a 3-0 vote and will be brought back in the first 2 weeks of January. And please just check our agenda there online. Very easy to find in the agendas when that will be. We post them by the Friday before. Or call us. Feel free to call as well. I'm sure you have Rob's contact info. So, okay, thank you. Good discussion on that, and give everyone a chance to study up on this as well for a few weeks before that comes back. We'll go next to item 11, which is discussion and or action to consider a revised interlocal agreement with Pleasant View City for our engineering services, our new city engineer that was introduced previously. We've, based on what the council had requested, discussed it with Pleasant View City, and they accepted the change we had asked, but also added their own new item in there. So, John, can you please update us on the agreement?
So, council, the agreement is exactly the same as it was, except for this that you see in front of you in red, which just says we will provide them with an itemized invoice to pay from. And so that, we had asked them to cover part of the vehicle expenses. We anticipate it being about $250 a year for gas and an oil change. And then the vehicle will last us through the term of this contract, so there's no need for a new vehicle or to consider that at this point. So this has already been approved by their council, so we can approve it and sign it, send it back, and it should all be taken care of from here forward. Do you have any questions?
Agreement number?
A32, 2017.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve agreement A32-2017, interlocal agreement with Pleasant View for engineering services as described by our city attorney.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept this interlocal agreement for engineering services with Pleasant View City. Is there any further discussion? We'll start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Okay, then that motion passes on a 3-0 vote, and Lauren, you're officially employed now, I guess, with both cities,
So everything you've done to this point was for free. No billing.
So thank you. I think this is going to work well, and we've been very happy so far with it. Okay, we'll go to item 12, which is, we've got a couple annexations we need to discuss. One first on Mountain Road, so our city recorder, Annette Spendlove, will be our presenter on this.
Okay, council, this annexation was brought to you last week, and you had the public hearing, but we didn't have the completed documents to do the annexation, which we have now. on the webs. If you look at the plat map isn't correct yet, but it will be corrected when it goes with the ordinance to the Lieutenant Governor's office. This portion right here, it needs to be included. And we didn't have the correct legal description, which we have now, that you have. Right?
No, that was me.
Oh.
I was just giving you the legal description.
Yeah, let's read through all that, if we could.
I want to see John
Chains
march it
through-
off as we recall it out.
3/4 of the chains from 15 degrees. to-
Luckily, Lauren is still here, and he could probably do it much better than any of us.
Anyway, everything's in place now. We're just waiting for the plat map from the engineer, the Webb's engineer. And then Mr. Webb will have to pay his fees, and I'll send it down to the Lieutenant Governor's office to get certification. So the ordinance number on that is 2017-30.
Somebody else make a motion.
Cheryl has it, yeah.
It's 2017-30, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. I make a motion that we can consider the proposed annex located approximately at 2521 North Mountain Road.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for an ordinance declaring the annexation of the described property on Mountain Road. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
And Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then that annexation is approved on a vote of 3-0. And we'll move to item number 13, which is to amend a previous annexation at the Village at Prominence Point on Washington Boulevard. And Annette, please tell us about this one.
You've already approved this ordinance, but we found some errors in it. The legal description did not match the plat map that they send over to us, the final plat map. And so we needed to get that adjusted and corrected, and we've done that. And you know, this is Village at Prominence Point, or Meritage Corporation LLC, and Mountain Vista Trails LLC are the owners of this. And it's the land for the Village at Prominence Point. So we've got all the correct information that we need to send back to the Lieutenant Governor's office to get this certified.
So, Council, so this area down here, this little box, includes the legal description, and they gave us the revised plat, but they said, hey, here's the plat, but they didn't tell us they changed the language. And so the ordinance, as it is before you tonight, is that it matches that box, but the previous ordinance was off in the sense that one 25-foot measurement had a slightly different bearing and call out, but the Lieutenant Governor's office wouldn't let us get it through without it being exactly matching. So
is it the same ordinance number, which was 2017-23?
A, because it's
Okay.
amended.
So I move we accept, was it ordinance number? 2017-23A
Right.
for the Village of Prominence Point.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for ordinance 2017-23A, amending the annexation for the Village at Prominence Point. Is there any further discussion? Start the voting with Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
and Councilman Satterthwaite. Swanson. It's going to take some getting used to. It used to go Stoker, Satterthwaite, so.
Yes. That
And
went
you're
down
all
the wrong
S's.
pipe. Oh, my gosh.
Is that a yes, Councilman?
That is a yes.
You didn't get
Okay.
that? Wow. Timing's everything, huh?
Anybody know CPR?
So that motion passes eventually on a
heartburn on this one,
3-0 vote, and that updated annexation will now go back to the Lieutenant Governor's office. Our last item tonight, item 14, is kind of an update that's arisen out of the recycling situation. Earlier this year, the Weber County Transfer Station stopped accepting recyclables. The program had been not properly managed for a number of years and was hemorrhaging money, and the county got out of the recycling business in addition to raising their tipping fee charges for garbage. Another private company in Ogden, Recycled Earth, stepped forward to accept recycled materials. At first, they thought they could do it at no charge. Then they started charging, and now actually they need to charge a little bit more. The recycle market, just a little background, has basically collapsed as a commodity because China used to take all the recycled materials in giant bales, and too much of it is contaminated, bad stuff that doesn't belong in the recycled stream, and so they've just largely stopped taking it unless it's very specific materials. And so it's getting harder and harder to sell bales of recycled goods, and that's where this is coming from. So Washington Terrace mayor and city manager have been working on behalf of the whole county to get an agreement with Recycled Earth, and then John has been our point of contact on this with them. So, John, why don't you go through the proposed agreement with Recycled Earth, and then we'll see if there's any questions about it.
So the agreement, what it actually is it's an agreement that's already been entered into between Ogden City, South Ogden City, Riverdale, and Washington Terrace. And what it essentially says is they agree to take our recycled materials for $36.80 per ton. They will sort out what they can use and recycle, and then the rest they'll take to the dump at their own expense, which is why they're charging us the $36 per ton. That's the cost, or that'll be the cost for them to take it back over and tip it at the county transfer station. The way this agreement is written is that any city can join in the agreement. We can't amend anything. We can either say, yes, we agree to it, or we don't. Right now, we're actually paying a little more than $36.80. I thought I had it here. We're actually paying $37.80 right now per ton that we drop off at recycling. So we're actually paying more for recycling than we are for trash at this moment in time. But if we sign on to this agreement, then they'll hold it at that $36.80 for the future. And then these cities, again, I think Washington Terrace is the one that's kind of taking the lead on this, are working out a long-term project or contract that they're hoping that all the cities and Recycled Earth or a future provider can deal with. From the memo, this year we increased our tipping fee by 40 cents just to cover the increase in recycling, which we originally thought was going to be $26.81 a ton. And so if we were going to absorb this additional cost, we should consider raising another 18 cents. We actually end up with enough money in the budget based on our current projections to probably cover the cost. But that 18 cents a month would cover this new increase of about $12 or $10 per ton that we'll be paying. So it's, as you can tell, the tipping fee at the site is not the most expensive component of recycling or of trash. It's a very small component, but it is a cost that the city has to bear. So, any questions for me? Yeah.
On this agreement, how long is the agreement for at this moment?
I believe it is set up. Let me just read it to you.
Just looking for that.
I thought it was just for a year. Yep, 12 years. So
Months?
12 months or 12 years?
12 months, not exceeding 1 year.
Okay. So, and then in there you had mentioned that we don't have to sign all of it or something like that, or?
So all we have to do is tell them we agree to this agreement and we'll sign it and send it to them. But because it's already in place, there's nothing we can do to amend it. Plus the city manager at Washington Terrace, Justin? Tom. Close. I was close.
That was way close.
He has really taken this on, and they've done a good job of going through it. And Ogden City, Riverdale, South Ogden, and Washington Terrace have all had their attorneys and everyone look at it. So there's nothing hiding in this agreement, but it essentially allows us to get rid of the recycling in a way that's more environmentally friendly than just doing away with it entirely, and really at about the same cost that we'd be paying anyways.
And it's also somewhat of a stopgap. We're hoping that something's going to change with the recycled market well above us to where there'll be a market for recycled again. Otherwise, it's possible, if this continues as it's headed, that recycling could go away and everything just goes in the garbage. Other than maybe a few specific things, we could have some bins out there for certain plastics and stuff, but a lot of the market has just gone away for recycling besides clean cardboard boxes, clean plastics, and a couple other items. So more than half the stuff that goes into the blue can is junk. And that's been the problem. It gets in these gigantic bales, and it ends up going to the supplier, and they're like, or the final buyer, and it's just bad separation is killing recycling, because just too much useless stuff like nasty, greasy pizza boxes are not recyclable. A clean box from Amazon, you just took a nice package out and that's recyclable. So.
And they actually say that like a dirty pizza box will ruin half a load in the entire truck. So by the time it gets into the machine and churned, it contaminates everything around it. And so,
or any green waste can contaminate the entire load. Like somebody throws some leaves in there. Organic materials of any kind will contaminate the load. So yeah, it's the recycling is really struggling right now.
So does this agreement, if can we back out of it within a year, or are we locked into a year no matter what?
So the rest of the term is about 6-7 months, because they actually started the agreement back in September, and so we'd be locked in for that amount of time. So it's not a full year; it's just until the agreement expires with Ogden. And
so in 6 or 7 months, we're going to have to come back and look at this anyway.
Yeah.
We'll discuss it during the budget process.
I'm fine with it at this point. How do you feel, Phil?
It's all about the children.
Okay, that's all that matters. So do you have an agreement number?
Long-running joke.
Yeah.
A34-2017.
A34-2017?
Yes.
I move that we accept A34-2017 with the agreement with the recycler.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this agreement with Recycled Earth for recycling services. Is there any further discussion? Start the Councilman Swanson.
Just for future review, I'm okay with this now, but I'd like us to make sure that we are appropriately charging for our recycle bins and all that kind of good stuff to cover these really pretty enormous costs compared to what it was just a couple of years ago.
It's gone from $0 to $36.
You hate to raise fees and all that kind of good stuff, but the city isn't a charity where we take people's trash away for free. There's a cost associated, and so I'd like a review, say by the end of January, of where we are, so that we can look moving forward as we start getting into budget season and stuff like that we can take a look at those fees.
We're working on that, actually, as part of the budget.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll start the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That agreement passes then on a 3-0 vote. And I thought, Annette, really quick, so agreement 34, what was our ordinance count for this year?
30.
30. That's not bad. A whole year of governing a city, we only had 30 ordinances, and many of them were for things like passing the budget that are simply required. They're not necessarily actually new laws for the city. So
I think we should follow the state legislature and have at least 200 for next year.
They're over 1,000.
Well, but I'm
Right,
just
okay.
scaling it down
Okay.
for us. If we had 30 this year,
I think
scaling it up to match, we should have around 200 ordinances.
Okay.
I think 4 or 5 of them were annexations as well.
Yeah.
So
So this is not a city that just runs around making a bunch of new laws and ordinances. So that's good.
I don't agree with Phil. I don't want any.
Okay, we'll have our public comments next. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone that'd like to share anything with the city council, we invite you forward.
Sarah Fossen, 1205 East, 2325 North. A couple of comments. I had some things that came to my mind as you were discussing the residential in the commercial area. I really like the idea of considering a different zoning that's more of a mixed use, because I really think you can't just take one special circumstance and then create limitations that don't exist. I wouldn't really be for owner occupied, and this is why. Think about why people put a residence in a business. There are several different reasons. You talked about the storage facilities. There are actually residences, for example, inside Ogden Regional. There's a whole permanent residence for a couple of physicians that have a purpose, that they have a work function, that sometimes they need to be close by. The funeral homes a lot of times have a residence in them, and they actually hire an employee to live there and offer services at different hours. And so I think we need to respect the businesses and the function for why they would want a residence in their business. I feel like if the manager of Smith's wants to build an apartment above it, I'd probably vote for it. I'd be totally fine with Phil living above his tools. It's fine with me. So I would probably be more for using, because you have already made definitions about how that mixed use happens within that zone, about how businesses and residences will coexist, and you don't have to reinvent the whole ordinance when you have already defined it. So the other thing, I don't know, can we assess less expensive options for recycling if we do a public service campaign about clean recycling, maybe on the city website or in the North Ogden Connection magazine? Just a quick thought about that. So thank you for your service, and I look forward to joining you.
Thank you, Councilwoman-elect, and we'll see you January 2nd for the swearing in.
Steve Rasmussen, 1092 East, 3250 North. I was just going to echo maybe some of what was just said. I was never convinced through the discussion that making it absolutely have to be owner occupied was a restriction that we should make on it. That if we're going to allow it, it would be nice if the business is going to have some owner occupied, but I think there are other reasons why that might be acceptable, to have someone there that maybe isn't an owner occupied type situation. And then the other is just a general comment. We were talking about 30 ordinances, and that's good. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of cities have more ordinances than that. If it were me, I would say the goal is to have a whole lot less than 30 ordinances every year rather than more. We have the ability, or you have the ability, that we have granted you to regulate what happens in North Ogden. That is an awesome responsibility for you to have to do that. But just because we can regulate something doesn't necessarily mean we need to regulate something. And in this day and age of what it means to be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, so to speak. Every time we make regulations, sometimes we can limit what people perceive to be happiness to them. I would like to do this, but no, in this city I can't. So I think I would admonish you as this year goes on and you start down that road to take a serious look at, does something really actually need to be regulated, or can we just let that go on its own? They talk about the overreach in Washington, D.C., and how they're over-regulating this and over-regulating that. None of those things really ever affect me. The stuff that does affect me is what you guys decide. And so anytime we can let freedom ring, so to speak, and let an owner of a property do what they need to do or would like to do with that property, I think we ought to try and do that. And I realize that no rules in a community just, anarchy reigns, and we can't have that either. So it is a delicate balance between what we regulate and what we don't. But I hope that we'll err on the side of less regulation rather than more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Great comments. I should probably add that many of those ordinances were removing restrictions, because that's an ordinance too. So tonight, when we did the new sign, it was an ordinance, but to remove having to go to the planning commission. So some of them, at least, I don't know exactly how many, have been ordinances that adjusted in a positive way some previous ordinance that was made too. So, but well taken points. Okay, anyone else? Okay, let's do our staff comments. Lauren, welcome again. Anything you'd like to add? No. Okay, Dave, Public Works Director, thanks for being here. Annette?
Just a reminder, tomorrow night's the Christmas party starts at 6 p.m.
Timber mine?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
John, anything?
I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but the amphitheater is underway. If you do want to go visit, make sure that you coordinate with me or the mayor so we can get you in touch with the right folks. You have to have a hard hat and a jacket when you're on site. So just that's the only thing I've got.
Good note. And you're always welcome if you would like to go through that as well. And we'll need a new council member. I'll send this out to everyone to join the amphitheater committee if anyone's interested, of our current council members or our two new ones. Councilman Satterthwaite, of course, is no longer on the council and won't be there. So just a little note as well. We do meet during the daytime, though, at 11 o'clock on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Okay, thank you, John. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, Councilman Turner. So start the last comments of the year.
I guess you get. I don't know if everybody saw my sweater.
We heard zoom our camera in on that.
This is even the better. This better part of it is.
Thank you. Our lives have been.
So, anyway,
I'm a better person for that. Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. So, I just want to wish everybody Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It's been a good year. I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Councilman Swanson.
Just a few things. Can we have on January 9th, I've had a number of citizens that would like to have a discussion about ways that we can promote clean air activities here with the inversions that we've been having, this long one that was so nasty recently. On January 9th, can we have that as an agenda item so that those citizens can come and express and we can talk about things that we can do as a city through whether it's a resolution or encouraging businesses to promote non-idling at drive-throughs and or anything like that.
Absolutely.
So January 9th? Okay, good. I'll let them know that January 9th.
Yeah, did you know
this comes from the guy that was just coughing up a lung.
Yeah, it's because that clean air. The next question I have is, who determines the location and direction of stop signs?
That is determined by our chief of police following the United States Department of Transportation Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. It's available online if you'd like to look at it. It's a uniform manual to say, based on the traffic of each leg, where the stop sign will go. If you think it should be re-reviewed, because sometimes patterns change, especially as this street used to end here, but now it continues because of new subdivision, the chief can always review them. So send it to John or I, and we can have it
Could we have the intersection at 3200 and 800 East reviewed right there just northwest of Bates?
So yes.
It's fine when the roads are well, but going uphill on that thing, if you have to stop going up 800, that's a pretty steep little hill right there.
Yeah.
A lot of cars can't get going again because of that north-south stop sign. Switch it so that the stop signs were east-west on 3200 instead of on 800. Always just seemed like a really odd place for a stop sign.
So we'll ask chief to review that with the uniform standards and get back with you.
And then along the same lines, this is probably maybe for Lauren or one of our other public works. Could we check the sight triangle for the marquee sign that the vet has right here on Washington? As you're coming off on, what is that, Loman View or Elbert? No, it's not Alberta. Pleasant View Drive. You cannot see north at that intersection unless you are in the intersection. I mean, you can't see maybe 1.5 car lengths north with that big marquee sign. I sat there the other day and watched a number of people about give Northview Fire some business, trying to get out into the intersection far enough to see and then actually come to a stop at that stop sign.
Okay.
And other than that, echo Carl's sentiments. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Looking forward to the new council members. Thank you, Carl. It is an absolute pleasure working with all of you. It is an absolute just joy. It's great.
Thank you. Councilwoman Stoker.
Just Merry Christmas, too.
Okay, and I don't have anything to add. We ended our last meeting, at 8:05. That's a good end of the year. It's been a great year. It's been great to work with you all and our council members who've departed, but look forward to another great year next year. So Merry Christmas, everyone, and we'll see you on January 2nd.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. We're adjourned.